Hi guys, so if you like this content, feel free to like and subscribe and go ahead and press the little bell button if you want to get notifications when I put up new content. And then if you're interested in private coaching, go to www.coachcat.org. It's mostly sort of trauma coaching and codependence coaching, and to help you overcome narcissistic abuse or any sort of toxic relationship you're in with a sex addict, alcoholic, whatever. So what I'm going to talk about in this video is anxious attachment style and codependence and sort of the links with those two. So if you have anxious preoccupied attachment, it means that you sort of have, you tend to have an excessive emotional or psychological reliance on a partner. And oftentimes it could be a sick partner, somebody with either personality disorder, they could be borderline, they could be narcissistic. They also could be, you could be with somebody who's an addict or who's suffering from mental illness. Not necessarily, but it's very common. And what happens is sort of an addictive pattern forms in these relationships where the lines tend to get blurred between personal boundaries. This can create sort of a toxic bond within the relationship that actually has sort of an addictive component between two people. And this is sort of a pattern of relationship behaviors where the boundaries are either enmeshed or blurred or they're walls, right? So whatever, it can vacillate between the two. And usually this is an unconscious effort by both parties, or it's usually subconscious. And it's like the whole sort of goal is to get their needs met and to help to alleviate their fears. So this is like a lot of subconscious or unconscious driving forces here. And typically what happens is the lines will get blurred between personal boundaries and sort of self-identity. This can create really toxic patterns in relationships. It's almost the idea that the other person is destroying, or sometimes that you can get that they're destroying your sense of self. It's not necessarily because the other person means to do this or is even aware, right? Sometimes it is just like this deeply embedded and like mostly subconscious fears around abandonment. And those are all sort of like the loss of the person or being disconnected or being disliked or being excluded. And this typically comes from that core abandonment wound that happened from 0 to 5. So the parties in these sort of dysfunctional relationships will often self-sacrifice, and they sometimes will even self-sacrifice their core identity in order to avoid abandonment or the pain of abandonment. So their fears, largely unconscious, are literally running the show. And this is all about avoiding pain. And sometimes what happens is, especially with the codependent, is the self can actually disappear. So typically the codependent is willing to give up their sense of self in order to avoid abandonment and pain. And sometimes this is their subconscious mind that's actually telling them that connection is the opposite of safety. So especially when they have the anxious attachment style coupled with the codependence, they're associating connection with the opposite of safety. So connection equals safety, even if this connection is actually a toxic bond and actually at the root not really safe. So anxious preoccupied these attachment styles tend to be more focused on another's feelings much more than their own. So the exception to this is when their survival instinct will start to kick in, and then in that sort of survival instinct scenario, then they'll finally put their needs first, right? By leaving an abusive relationship or getting out of a toxic situation. When the anxious preoccupied feels that their partner is actually pulling away, even if this is simply the other party that's doing self-care, the subconscious mind of the child psyche kicks in. And the anxious preoccupied, which is like the little kid inside, the little kid inside will, it'll like trigger their survival instinct, right? It'll just trigger it. And the abandonment wound will kick in, right? So we'll do all of these things when we're trying to avoid abandonment, right? And it's really subconscious. And this also can come in when there's like a lack of approval or disappointment. If the other party shows like disappointment or disapproval, then this can trigger that person's survival instinct to kick in. And just keep in mind that this type of attachment style, the anxious attachment style, the anxious preoccupied attachment style, again, they equate connection with safety and the lack of connection with danger. And this is totally different than the avoidant attachment. The avoidant attachment actually equates connection with danger, right? So it's this interesting dynamic because you often have the preoccupied anxious attachment style going after an avoidant. It's really interesting. So being excluded, if you have the anxious preoccupied attachment style, makes you feel like you're not belonging or being disliked, means your safety will be jeopardized. At least that's what the subconscious driver is telling them. And they may not realize this. This is all about a subconscious trauma response. And like it's the idea that if I'm not getting approval and connection, then I'm not safe. And they place a really strong emphasis on approval. And they have this fear of being excluded, disliked, and that's actually linked to their survival. At least in the trauma response mind, that's what it feels like. So it's super important to recognize that the sense of self-worth is defined by all the relationships that they sort of have around them. Sorry, my phone's a bit wonky. So they have this like traumatic fear of abandonment that is defining their sense of self. So lack of connection linked to survival. And again, these are all sort of unconscious or subconscious drivers until you start recognizing that you may have this attachment style. You start to realize it and you realize that, oh, that's my, attachment driver that's being triggered right now. And my traumatic fear of abandonment is actually maybe forcing or allowing me to self-abandon, and I'll do anything to, maintain that connection, even if that connection is to a, toxic, abusive person. So again, that traumatic fear of abandonment is defining their sense of self. And again, lack of connection, if you have this particular attachment style, is linked to survival. So they fear that they must put the relationship before them, right? Instead of taking time for themselves, meeting their own needs, or doing self-care. It actually sort of feels wrong if you have this attachment style, and putting yourself on par or above others feels wrong, right? So these are the types that struggle with, they can struggle with self-reflection and introspection because they're so focused on the other, or even the idea that they matter. And they have a really hard time. These people have a really hard time taking time out for themselves. They often make justifications for putting other people's needs above their own. And like the most insecure thing we can actually ever, the truth is the most insecure thing that we can actually depend on is other people, right? So putting them above ourselves, if you have this particular attachment style, is self-abandonment. People are going to let you down eventually. They always do. The reason why is because we're humans and we all make mistakes. We are all flawed. So when we are basically putting others above ourselves, we're putting our self-worth in the hands of another person, like eventually they're going to let us down because that's just being human. So really the difference between sort of this type of attachment style and this type of dependency is sort of a healthy interdependency where you're able to set boundaries and you're able to get some needs met by that person, but then also other needs met by others. And then you're able to do some self-regulation and meet your own needs. If I am like filling myself up, right, and I'm taking care of me and I'm taking care of my needs and I'm not over-reliant on another person to sort of meet my needs, then it's like I'm not in this coming from this place of lack. So people that have the anxious, preoccupied attachment style, they are coming from this place of lack. They are coming from this place of there's never never going to be enough for them. So they have this kind of scarcity mentality. And again, if they can learn to meet their own needs, then they don't have this sort of inherent dependency on other people. And we can't derive our sense of self or our sense of security from our relationships, even if they're really good relationships. We just can't. We've got to be able to tap into our own agency and our own sense of self and have it be sort of internal, with this internal drive, this internal sense of self, rather than this dependent need on external relationships. And of course, if folks cannot meet your needs, then you're not going to feel like death if they're abandoning you. Like if you get abandoned by somebody, it's not going to be the end of the world for you, because your whole self-esteem is not based on, what that person thinks or doesn't think of you. And this can be really painful and challenging to learn how to self-soothe and self-regulate, but it is so important, especially for this attachment style. There's other attachment styles that I'm going to talk about that actually need to learn how to be more dependent on others and more interdependent and sort of less like self-reliant, right? But they're also, the avoidant attachment, they're also horrible at meeting their own needs in a really, truly healthy way. But it's really important, if you have this particular type, if you have the anxious, preoccupied attachment style, that you really work on self-regulating, self-soothing, meeting your own needs, and do not ignore your boundaries. Set your boundaries. Figure out what your core values are, get really clear on those, and be really, learn how to set these healthy boundaries, and learn how to prioritize your own needs so that you're not over reliant on other people to meet your needs, right? And you're not putting other people above yourself like they're like, gods or whatever. You're learning how to, meet your own needs. You're learning how to set and maintain healthy boundaries, and you're learning how to listen to your body to see what you really need and to meet those needs and to self-soothe and self-regulate, rather than, needing to always have somebody else to like tell you how to feel about yourself. And again, this attachment style, if you have the anxious avoidant, or the anxious preoccupied, not avoidant, the anxious preoccupied attachment style, your boundaries, it's really, really important that you learn how to set and maintain healthy boundaries, that you listen to your body, you listen to your intuition, and you learn how to do like radical self-care. This can be fixed. You can earn secure attachment. Part of it is you can break the cycle by getting very, very clear on what your needs are. Communicate this to others, and then work on your core abandonment wounds and learn how to stop being so dependent on the approval of others. And if people need to leave you for whatever reason, or if they don't like you, or if they disapprove, or they need to exit the relationship, well, okay, it's not going to be the end of the world for you, especially if you have multiple good, healthy relationships, but most important that you have a good, healthy relationship with yourself, and you learn how to self-soothe, self-care, self-regulate. You put your needs on par with others rather than putting them above you. You don't need their approval in order to feel okay about yourself. And, really tapping into this internal approval, internal validation, rather than requiring outside validation in order to feel okay. So, kind of went off on a tangent here, but this is, again, if you have the anxious preoccupied attachment style. I am going to do some videos on the other attachment styles, including the avoidant. And, sometimes, and I'll make a video on this too, sometimes, man, you can be in a relationship. It can depend upon the person you're in relationship with in terms of, how anxious you are, in terms of, how you're manifesting that anxious preoccupied attachment. Ideally, if you have this anxious preoccupied attachment style, even though you're probably going to be attracted to avoidance, really your best bet is to actually be with a secure partner, because they are less likely to trigger your core abandonment wound, right? Unfortunately, from what I've read, it's less than 50% of the US population have secure attachment. So, especially as you get older in the dating pool, it's okay, there's a lot of avoidance in the dating pool, because avoidants actually end up being in more relationships relationship statistically than any other attachment style, which is so ironic, but they're, they have to be in relationship. They have to have somebody chase them because they have to be running. So, right, they're being chased, they run, but they're constantly in these these serial relationships. So it's sort of interesting, but I will do some videos on that. But in general, if you have the, anxious, preoccupied attachment style, you're going to be better off if you are actually with somebody who has secure attachment, because they're not going to take it so personally that you have these sort of triggering, anxiety and these anxiety triggers. And then they may also model sort of healthy self-care. And then you can sort of pick up on that. I'm not saying that they have to do that, but I'm just saying, like, if you're with somebody who's securely attached, it's much better partner for somebody who has the anxious, preoccupied attachment style. And securely attached, and these attachment styles have nothing to do with you being like a defective person or you're weak. It's because of what happened to you from 0 to 5. It's because of your attachment with your primary caregivers. It has nothing to do with you. You had no choice over that, right? So, but somebody who had good enough parenting, according to Bowlby and Ainsworth, is like somebody who had secure, they developed secure attachment, and it had to do with their parents, nothing to do with them. It's not a character defect, it's not a weakness, it's not a flaw. It had to do with your attachment to your primary caregivers from 0 to 5 years old, before you even knew what was going down. So hopefully this will help you if you're struggling with the anxious, preoccupied attachment style and trying to understand why you might be attracted to people that are avoidant. And of course, most narcissists are avoidant. So hopefully this was helpful to you. Thanks so much and have a good day. Bye.